Millionaire X tried to take his kids in court, then his son read hand over a letter that changed. Before starting to watch this story, tell us in the comments section from which city you're watching this story. Let's enjoy this story. The courtroom in downtown Chicago was unusually crowded that morning. A light drizzle tapped on the windows as Emily sat on the edge of the wooden bench, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart racing with every tick of the clock. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a harsh glare on the polished floors. Her lawyer, Helen Briggs, whispered something reassuring, but the words barely registered. Across the aisle, her ex-husband, Daniel Griffin, sat with an air of confidence that only money could buy. Tailored suit, polished shoes, a smug smirk resting under his salt and pepper beard, everything about him screamed control. Behind him, two attorneys scrolled through tablets, murmuring legal jargon with the comfort of professionals who knew how to win cases like these. Emily glanced to her left where Liam, her 14-year-old son, sat quietly trying to look brave. His little sister, Sophie, sat beside him, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Emily reached out, gently brushing a lock of hair from Liam's forehead, trying to stay strong for both of them. It had been nearly 2 years since their divorce. The split was bitter, worsened by Daniel's refusal to accept that someone might choose peace over privilege. He had once been a loving husband, or at least she thought so, until the business deals, late nights and endless networking took over. Daniel built a fortune in real estate, climbing the ranks of Chicago's elite. But with success came ego, and with ego came detachment. When Emily finally left, she took nothing but her children, some clothes and a few photographs. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Oak Park and began teaching full-time at a local public school. Life wasn't easy, but it was real. Packed lunches, weekend laundromats, rainy day board games and whispered bedtime stories. Now here she was, fighting for the very right to continue raising her children. Daniel had filed for full custody 3 months earlier, claiming Emily was emotionally unstable and financially incapable of providing a proper upbringing. His affidavit painted her as overwhelmed and erratic. In truth, she had never missed a single school meeting, never left the kids with a babysitter longer than needed, and often sacrificed her own meals to put better food on their plates. The irony of being called unfit by the very man who had barely spent a full weekend with the children since their divorce made her want to scream. But she stayed quiet, trusting that the court would see the truth. The bailiff called the case. Everyone stood. Judge Marcus Reinhardt, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, entered and took his seat. Helen leaned in again. "Don't panic. Stay calm. You've got this." Emily nodded, though her insides felt like they were unraveling. Opening statements began. Daniel's lawyer, a woman named Miranda Callow, stood confidently and began painting an image of a hard-working father trying to rescue his children from instability. She referenced income brackets, the zip codes of their respective neighborhoods, even brought up Sophie's recent dental procedure, paid for by Daniel of course, to highlight how Emily couldn't keep up with essential medical expenses. Emily sat frozen, her stomach tightening with each carefully chosen word. Then Helen rose and began the slow work of unraveling the picture Daniel had tried to paint. She spoke gently but firmly, reminding the court that children were not projects to be managed, but people to be nurtured. She talked about Emily's daily routine, the children's stable academic performance, and how Liam had made the honor roll last semester. She even mentioned the letters Sophie had written to Santa asking not for toys, but for her family to stay together. But nothing in those statements seemed to shift Daniel's confidence. He leaned back, arms folded, casting the occasional glance toward the judge, as if this were just another negotiation, another deal to close. Emily knew that look. She had seen it during their marriage, at parent-teacher conferences and birthday parties, that slight detachment like he was always a little too busy for real life. Then came the witness testimonies. Daniel's nanny, a young woman named Courtney who had spent maybe 3 weekends with the kids, claimed Emily often dropped them off late, sometimes without proper clothes. Emily's face flushed with quiet fury. Lies, scripted lies. She had no way to disprove them except her own word. When Helen cross-examined, Courtney's confidence faltered slightly, but not enough to be dismissed. Liam watched silently, his jaw tight. Emily noticed how he gripped the straps of his backpack a little harder, like he was holding on to something important. Sophie, bored and tired, leaned against her brother, eyes starting to droop. Emily wrapped her arm around her gently, whispering, "Almost done, sweetheart." The judge paused for a recess and Emily stepped out into the hallway, breathing deeply. Her hands trembled as she poured a cup of water from the cooler. Daniel passed by, his lawyer trailing behind. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. Emily already knew what he was thinking, that his money, his power, and his version of providing would win. But what he didn't know was that Liam had a secret. Something he hadn't told anyone, not even his mother. Tucked deep in his backpack, beneath his sketchbook and algebra homework, was a letter, handwritten, folded 3 times, and sealed with the same seriousness with which he had written it. It was something he had poured his heart into after one particularly cold weekend at Daniel's condo. Something he planned to share at the right moment. Emily didn't know it yet, but that letter would change the entire course of the hearing. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. 2 years ago, if someone had told Emily that she'd be sitting in a courtroom fighting for custody of her own children, she would have laughed it off. Back then her world looked completely different. The large house in Lincoln Park, the private school tuition, the weekend getaways to Lake Geneva, all of it seemed like part of a carefully planned life. But underneath the polished surface, things were slowly crumbling. Daniel had become someone she no longer recognized. He stopped coming home for dinner, skipped parent-teacher meetings, and often returned from his business trips distant and irritable. Conversations had turned into arguments, and arguments into silence. The emotional disconnect grew thicker with each passing week, until Emily realized they were no longer partners, just 2 people orbiting the same routine out of habit. She still remembered the night she told him she wanted a divorce. It was raining just like today, and he didn't even look up from his phone. He simply said, "If that's what you want," and walked away. There were no pleas, no questions, just a strange sense of relief on his face, like she'd freed him from something inconvenient. The divorce proceedings had been swift, thanks to Daniel's high-powered legal team. Emily, lacking resources and overwhelmed by the legal jargon, didn't fight much. She just wanted out. The agreement granted her primary physical custody, while Daniel had visitation every other weekend. It seemed fair at the time, especially since he'd barely shown interest in the logistics of parenting. But as months passed, something began to shift. Daniel, perhaps driven by ego or the idea that his children were slipping from his influence, started challenging her decisions. He questioned doctors' appointments, criticized their school choices, even sent her emails nitpicking the kids' outfits and family photos. At first, Emily dismissed it as typical post-divorce tension. But when Daniel suddenly demanded full custody, claiming she was unfit, the panic set in. She never imagined he'd go this far. Despite his coldness, Daniel had never been abusive. But now, with his wealth and lawyers spinning stories, Emily felt like she was being painted as someone she wasn't. The courtroom made her feel small, like she had to prove her worth as a mother in front of strangers who only knew her through affidavits and second-hand statements. The irony, of course, was that while Daniel's lawyers portrayed her as unstable, she was the one waking up at 5:30 every morning to make breakfast, pack lunches, and drive the kids to school before heading to her job at a public middle school. She graded essays until midnight, skipped meals to stretch her grocery budget, and still found time to sit on the edge of Sophie's bed when nightmares struck. Yet none of that was in the documents. All the court saw was that Daniel owned a 4-story townhouse and had a 6-figure income, while Emily lived in a 2nd-floor rental and drove a used Subaru. That night, after the first hearing, Emily sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. The kids were asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Oregon, offering emotional support, but Emily didn't respond. She felt too hollow to talk. The thought of losing her children, not just legally but emotionally, made her physically sick. She remembered how after the separation, Liam had gone quiet for weeks. He stopped drawing, something he used to love, and barely touched his food. It wasn't until Emily surprised him with an old sketch pad and new pencils that he started to come back to life. He had always been a quiet, thoughtful kid, someone who felt things deeply but rarely voiced them. Sophie, on the other hand, was expressive and curious, always asking questions about the world and people. It broke Emily's heart that she couldn't shield them from the tension they were now being dragged into. Earlier that summer, after one of their visits to Daniel's new place, Liam had returned more withdrawn than usual. He didn't offer much when Emily asked about the weekend. He just went to his room and stayed there most of the evening. Later, she found his sketchpad on the coffee table, open to a half-finished drawing of their old house. The lines were dark and heavy, nothing like his usual style. That night, while checking on him, she found a crumpled piece of paper tucked under his pillow. It was the beginning of a letter. The handwriting was jagged, but the words were sharp and honest. He had written about feeling like a guest in his father's house, how Daniel always seemed distracted, more interested in phone calls than in them. He wrote about the time Daniel's girlfriend, whom they had just met, told him not to eat snacks in the living room because it was too messy for guests. Liam ended the note with, "I don't feel like I belong there." Emily hadn't told him she'd seen it, but something inside her shifted. She realized her son was carrying more weight than he let on. In the weeks leading up to the custody hearing, Liam spent more time alone. He often scribbled in a small notebook and carried it everywhere, even to the grocery store. Emily didn't pry. She figured it was his way of coping. But deep down, she hoped he was finding a way to express the pain and confusion they were all feeling. What she didn't know was that he was drafting something he hoped would one day be heard, something that might finally show the court what no amount of legal paperwork ever could. A child's truth, unpolished but powerful. As the second day of court loomed, Emily felt the weight of uncertainty more than ever. Daniel wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed more determined, more composed. But she had something he didn't, a home filled with love, not luxury. And whether the judge saw that or not, she knew Liam was quietly preparing for something that could shift the tide in ways neither side expected. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The courtroom smelled like old paper and polished wood, with a quiet tension that made every cough or shuffled footstep feel amplified. Emily sat beside her attorney, nervously twisting the edge of a tissue between her fingers. Across the aisle, Daniel looked perfectly composed in his tailored charcoal suit, speaking calmly to his attorney, a man with a slicked-back haircut and a reputation for being ruthless in custody cases. Daniel barely glanced at Emily, though when he did, his expression held that same smug detachment she'd come to hate, like he was already 3 moves ahead on some invisible chessboard. Their children, Liam and Sophie, were waiting in a separate room with a court-appointed counselor, just down the hall. Emily had barely slept the night before. She had spent hours going over every scenario, trying to prepare herself for whatever questions might come, whatever accusations Daniel's side might throw. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. Just before the session began, the court clerk entered with a file in hand, walked over to the judge and handed it over with a whisper. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Honorable Marcy Nolan, opened the folder and spent a few silent minutes reading the contents. The courtroom waited, holding its breath. Finally, she looked up and said, "We've received a letter from the minor child, Liam Brantley. He has requested, through the court counselor, that it be read during today's proceedings. Both counsel will be provided copies, and the original will be entered into the record." Emily's heart skipped. She looked at Liam's small blue backpack sitting on the bench beside her, realizing he must have slipped the letter into it the day before. Daniel's eyebrows twitched, the first crack in his usually controlled facade. Judge Nolan cleared her throat and began to read aloud. Her voice was even, but something about her eyes softened as she spoke. "Dear Judge, I know I'm only 12 and maybe my opinion doesn't count for much. But I wanted to write this because nobody ever asks me what I think. Everyone talks about what's best for me and Sophie, but it feels like no one really knows us. I love my dad. He used to be my favorite person. He showed me how to play chess, took me to see the Cubs when I was 5 and told the best stories when we went camping. But something changed. After the divorce, he started acting like he didn't really know how to talk to us anymore. He's always busy, always on the phone or in meetings. He says we're important, but when we're with him, I feel like we're just part of his schedule." Emily blinked fast, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. Judge Nolan continued reading. "His girlfriend doesn't like it when we make a mess, and sometimes it feels like we're visiting a hotel, not our dad. I never feel relaxed there. I miss Mom's house. It's not perfect and we don't have fancy stuff, but she listens. She always listens. She knows when I'm upset even if I don't say anything. She remembers the small stuff like how I hate pickles or that I like to sleep with the hallway light on. She makes me feel like I belong. When I had a stomach bug, she sat by my bed all night and held a trash can for me. I don't think my dad even knows I was sick." There was a pause, a silent ache in the room before the judge moved on. "I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but if you're asking what's best for us, then I think it's to stay with Mom. She understands us better and she doesn't try to prove things. She just cares. I know my dad has a big house and can buy us cool stuff, but what we really need is someone who sees us. And I think my mom sees us." By the time Judge Nolan finished, the courtroom was dead silent. Even Daniel's attorney looked momentarily thrown off, his confident posture slightly deflated. Emily didn't know whether to cry or smile. It was the first time anyone had heard Liam's voice so clearly, and it hit harder than any cross-examination or witness testimony. Judge Nolan placed the letter down and looked over her glasses at both parents. "This letter doesn't decide the case, but it does inform the court," she said. "Mr. Brantley, Mrs. Brantley, your son has spoken with clarity and maturity well beyond his years. I expect both parties to consider his words very seriously. For the rest of the session, the tone had shifted. Daniel's attorney tried to downplay the letter, suggesting that Emily may have influenced Liam. But when the court counselor testified that Liam insisted on writing it alone and refused help from either parent, that argument lost traction. Emily was asked questions about her parenting, her job, her weekly routine. She answered steadily, honestly. She talked about how she managed their school drop-offs, packed lunches, handled fevers and homework meltdowns, the 1,000 invisible tasks that came with raising children. Daniel, when he took the stand, stuck to facts and figures. He talked about future opportunities, financial stability, and the importance of discipline. But compared to Liam's letter, his answers sounded distant, like a PowerPoint presentation of fatherhood instead of the real thing. After court adjourned for the day, Emily stepped outside into the crisp Chicago afternoon. The sky had cleared, and the sun peeked through gray clouds, casting a warm glow on the marble steps. She sat on the bench just outside the courthouse and watched as Liam and Sophie exited with the court counselor. Liam walked toward her, calm but serious. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her and leaned against her shoulder. Sophie climbed onto her lap without a word. And for a moment they just sat there, no words, no courtrooms, just a mother and her children wrapped in quiet understanding. Whatever the final decision would be, Emily knew this day had changed everything. Not because of strategy or evidence, but because a boy found his voice when it mattered most. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The days following the court session felt heavier than usual for Emily. Every moment with Liam and Sophie became more precious, more vivid, like she was seeing the world in sharper colors. There was no official verdict yet. Judge Nolan had reserved her decision, citing the complexity of the case and the importance of reviewing all reports. But Emily couldn't stop replaying that moment in court, Liam's letter being read aloud, his words cutting through the polished arguments like a ray of truth. She knew how brave he had been to write that. At only 12, Liam had done something adults twice his age struggled with. He told the truth plainly and powerfully. Still, Emily remained cautious. Daniel wasn't someone who gave up easily, especially when something threatened his image. And the more she thought about it, the more certain she was that this wasn't over. One rainy afternoon, Emily received a call from her attorney, Vanessa. Her tone was careful but firm. Emily, we've just been informed that Daniel's legal team has filed a motion for an emergency hearing. They're arguing that your home environment is unstable and that you've manipulated Liam into writing that letter. Emily was stunned. She stood in her tiny kitchen in Rogers Park, staring out at the rain soaking her backyard, as if it would give her answers. Manipulated? She repeated. Vanessa sighed. They've submitted testimony from a private investigator who claims he saw you meeting with someone who has a history of child custody coaching. It's a stretch, but we have to address it. Emily's stomach twisted. She hadn't done anything even close to what they were suggesting. A friend from her parenting support group, Dana, had visited her a few times to check in, and she was a licensed family therapist, but she hadn't coached anyone. Emily had always kept things honest for her kids' sake most of all. But Daniel had money, and money could spin stories in dangerous ways. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Vanessa worked overtime gathering witnesses, including Dana, the kids' school principal, and even their neighbor Mrs. Flynn, who often babysat. Everyone Emily knew stood ready to defend her. But still, the pressure of it all weighed her down like 1,000 bricks. Meanwhile, Liam began acting quieter than usual. He'd always been an observant kid, but now he seemed overly cautious, like he was trying to keep his thoughts hidden. One evening, while tucking Sophie into bed, Emily noticed Liam sitting on the hallway floor with his sketch pad. She sat beside him and gently asked, "You okay, kiddo?" Liam shrugged. "Dad texted me today," he muttered, not looking up. "He said if I told the judge I changed my mind, we could go to Disneyland during spring break." Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to call Daniel and demand he stop using bribes to manipulate their children. But she didn't. Instead, she took a breath and asked, "What did you say?" Liam finally looked up at her. "I told him I'd think about it." Emily nodded. "That's okay. You don't have to decide anything tonight. Just promise me one thing." Liam waited. "Promise me you'll always tell the truth. Even if it's scary. Even if it makes things complicated. That's the only thing that matters." The hearing came faster than expected. This time, the courtroom felt colder, more formal, like it had lost whatever humanity it had during the first hearing. Daniel's team opened aggressively, presenting the private investigator's report and questioning Dana's credentials. But Dana, calm and collected, took the stand and confidently explained her role. "I never coached Emily's children. I am a licensed family therapist, yes, but my involvement was limited to friendly visits. I never met Liam or Sophie one-on-one. This narrative is pure fiction." Emily's defense was strong, but the hearing had taken a toll on her. Watching Daniel sit so comfortably while her life was being picked apart was infuriating. He seemed to view the whole process as a business negotiation. At one point, during a recess, Emily caught Daniel glancing at her with that same cold smirk that used to surface during their marriage when he thought he had the upper hand. But what neither of them expected happened next. Liam asked to speak privately with the judge again. The court counselor confirmed that it was Liam's idea, and with both legal teams consenting, Judge Nolan agreed. The court session was paused while Liam and the judge met in chambers, the door closed behind them. No one knew what was being said, but when Judge Nolan returned 15 minutes later, her expression had shifted. It was subtle, more thoughtful, more grounded. She announced that the court would reconvene in 1 week for her final decision. As everyone packed up, Emily glanced at Daniel. For the first time, his expression wavered, not angry, not smug, but uncertain. That night, back at home, Emily found a folded note on her nightstand. It was Liam's handwriting. "Mom, I didn't change anything. I told the truth again. Because you always say the truth is what keeps us safe even when it hurts. I just thought you should know. Love, Al." Emily sat on the edge of her bed and let the tears come freely, not from fear or frustration, but from pride. The kind that comes when you realize your child has taken everything you've taught them and carried it into the world with courage. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, Emily didn't feel alone in it. Her son wasn't just speaking up, he was standing up for himself, for his sister, and in his own way for her. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The following week passed with the slow burn of anxiety curling in Emily's stomach. Every morning, she woke up earlier than necessary, staring at the ceiling of her modest bedroom in Rogers Park, Chicago, replaying every detail of the last hearing. The thought that Daniel could still find a way to take her children clawed at her peace. He had the resources, the connections, and a ruthless ability to manipulate narratives. But what she clung to, was truth. And the steady, unwavering love of two children who had seen the difference between their parents not in what was said, but in how they were treated. On Wednesday morning, Emily walked the kids to school in the brisk Chicago wind, pretending to be calm, her coat pulled tight, cheeks pink from the cold. Liam gave her a half smile before heading inside. Sophie waved enthusiastically and ran ahead to catch her friend. Emily stood there for a moment, watching their backpacks bounce behind them, and reminded herself to breathe. Later that day she received a call from Vanessa. "The judge has finalized the decision," she said without preamble. Emily froze. "She's issuing it tomorrow morning. In person. No delays, no postponements." Emily nodded slowly, trying to digest it. The gravity of it settled in her bones. The custody battle that had dominated every thought, every moment of her life for the past year was finally coming to an end. That night, she tried to maintain normalcy at home. She made spaghetti, Liam's favorite, and played Guess the Animal with Sophie. The kids knew something big was coming, but they didn't ask too many questions. After tucking Sophie into bed, Emily found Liam at the kitchen table, staring at the homework he hadn't touched. "Do you think she'll believe me?" he asked, not looking up. "Judge Nolan?" Emily pulled out a chair beside him. "I think she already does," she said gently. "And I think you were braver than most grown-ups I've met." He looked at her finally, nodding with a mix of pride and fear. "What if it doesn't matter?" he whispered. "What if he still wins?" Emily rested her hand on his. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." The courtroom the next morning was quiet, almost reverent. Judge Nolan entered without ceremony, wearing the same calm expression that had become familiar over the past weeks. She didn't look at either party as she spoke. "This case has presented difficult questions. Allegations, rebuttals, emotional testimony. But after thorough consideration of all evidence, including the children's own perspectives, I am issuing my decision." Emily's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the words. Joint legal custody is to remain. However, primary physical custody will stay with the mother, Emily, with visitation rights to the father, under specific parameters set by the court. Daniel leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. The judge continued. "Furthermore, Mr. Dawson is to undergo a full parental evaluation before any future changes in custody can be requested. This court finds that the home environment provided by Ms. Rhodes is stable, nurturing, and aligned with the children's emotional needs. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was over. Or at least the worst part was. Vanessa squeezed her arm and whispered, "We did it." Across the room, Daniel stood slowly, adjusting his cuffs, his jaw tight. He didn't look at Emily, didn't speak to her. He just gathered his briefcase and walked out of the courtroom, his attorney close behind. It was a quiet exit, but Emily knew it wouldn't be his last attempt. Still, for now, she had won something that mattered more than money or pride: her children's safety and stability. That evening, Emily took Liam and Sophie to Lake Michigan. The shoreline was still cold, but the skies had cleared, and the setting sun bathed the water in gold. The kids skipped stones and Emily sat on a bench watching them laugh. She felt lighter than she had in months. Not because everything was solved. There would always be legal documents, co-parenting hurdles, and unpredictable emails from Daniel, but because her children had been heard. They'd found their voice, and more importantly, someone had listened. Liam ran back to the bench, cheeks flushed. "Can we get ice cream?" he asked. Emily laughed. "Even though it's freezing?" He grinned. "Exactly." They ended up at a small shop near the pier, sharing a sundae and squishing together in a booth too small for three. Sophie had whipped cream on her nose, and Liam teased her until she threatened to tickle him. Emily watched them and thought back to the moment in court when Judge Nolan had paused after Liam's letter. That had been the turning point. Not just legally but emotionally, for all of them. It was the first time Daniel hadn't been able to buy control. He couldn't twist Liam's words, couldn't spin them through lawyers or bank accounts. The letter had been pure, from the heart, and in a system often weighed down by technicalities, that truth had risen like a flare in the dark. Back at home, as the kids got ready for bed, Emily received a short text from an unknown number. "You got what you wanted. It's not over." She knew it was Daniel. And she knew he meant every word. But she also knew something else now: she could handle him. Maybe not without scars, but with strength. And she wasn't alone anymore. As she turned off the lights and listened to the quiet breathing of her children down the hall, she felt peace, not in the absence of problems, but in the knowledge that she'd fought for something that mattered and had earned a piece of justice in a world where it often felt out of reach. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Emily thought that after the court ruling things would settle. Maybe not become perfect, but at least become normal. For a few weeks that illusion held. Daniel kept his distance, content with his court-ordered visitation schedule, and Emily focused on rebuilding the fragile calm in their small apartment in Rogers Park, Chicago. Liam had started sleeping better. Sophie stopped asking if they'd have to move again. For the first time in months, Emily cooked full meals, took the kids out to the park without checking over her shoulder, and began making tentative plans for summer. But then the anonymous emails started. The first one seemed harmless, just a vague message sent to her work email late at night. "You think this is over?" Emily deleted it, assuming it was some spam or maybe a mistake. But 2 nights later, a second email arrived with a chilling tone. "You're not the only one who can play dirty. Watch your step." The sender had no name, no signature, and the message was brief, but the implication was clear. Emily immediately checked the locks on her apartment and started sleeping with her phone by her pillow. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but her gut screamed Daniel. She hadn't told the kids about the messages. They'd been through too much already, and the last thing she wanted was to reintroduce fear just as they were beginning to heal. Vanessa urged her to document everything. "Keep every email, every voicemail," she said. "If anything escalates, we need a paper trail." Emily nodded, though the act of saving those messages made her skin crawl. They were like digital ghosts, proof that even when Daniel wasn't physically present, he still hovered, still controlled corners of her life. Then came the day Liam came home with a strange look on his face. "Mom," he said, placing his backpack on the floor, "Dad showed up at school today." Emily dropped the dish she was rinsing. "What?" Liam nodded slowly. "He said he just wanted to say hi, but he wasn't supposed to be there, right?" Her heart pounded as she crouched in front of him. "Did he say anything else?" Liam shook his head. "Just asked if I was okay. He seemed mad that I didn't want to go get lunch with him." Emily stood up and immediately called Vanessa. They spent the next hour on the phone contacting the school and documenting the incident. Daniel hadn't broken any laws technically, but he'd violated the spirit of the court order. That was his tactic now, not outright aggression, but just enough subtle intrusion to keep her on edge. Still, Emily refused to crumble. She focused on what she could control. She signed Sophie up for swimming lessons at the local YMCA. She helped Liam apply for a junior robotics camp at Northwestern. And she picked up extra shifts at the local library to save for a much-needed vacation, even if it was just a weekend trip to Wisconsin Dells. She was determined not to let Daniel dictate their happiness. But the stress was mounting. Sleep became elusive again. She started checking her car before getting in, and flinched every time her phone buzzed. One night after a long day, she came home to find her front door slightly ajar. Panic surged through her. She ushered the kids into a neighbor's apartment and called the police. The officers didn't find anyone inside and nothing was taken, but the door lock had been tampered with. Emily filed a report and had the locks changed the next morning. She didn't need a confession to know who was behind it. That was when Liam made a suggestion she hadn't expected. "What if we talk to Grandpa?" he asked quietly as they sat in the living room one night. Emily blinked, surprised. "Your grandpa?" "Yeah," Liam nodded. "Dad's dad. He was always nice to us. Maybe he doesn't even know what Dad's doing." Emily had always kept her distance from Daniel's family, especially after the divorce. But she remembered Harold Dawson, an aging, quiet man who seemed more disappointed in his son than angry with Emily. After a moment's pause, she agreed. She found Harold's number in an old contact list and called. The voice that answered was weathered, unsure, but kind. When Emily explained the situation, Harold was silent for a long time. Then he sighed. "I had a feeling he'd spiral," he said. "Daniel's always been about control. His mother and I tried, but he got worse after the money came." Harold offered to meet Emily and the kids the following weekend in Evanston, just for lunch. Emily was hesitant but agreed. Maybe it would give Liam some peace. Maybe Harold could be an unexpected ally. When Saturday came, they met at a quiet diner. Harold looked older than Emily remembered, but his eyes lit up when he saw the kids. They chatted over pancakes and orange juice, and for a moment, it felt like a normal family breakfast. Then, as the kids went to the restroom, Harold leaned across the table. "Daniel won't stop," he said quietly. "Not unless someone forces him to." Emily nodded, her throat tight. "I've done everything I can legally." "Then maybe it's time someone else talks to him," Harold said. "Someone he can't ignore." Emily wasn't sure what that meant, but Harold's expression was firm, resolute. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. For now, she just needed a moment to breathe. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The morning after the lunch with Harold, Emily found herself staring at the ceiling long after the alarm had gone off. The apartment was still dark, but her mind was buzzing. Harold's words echoed in her thoughts, "Someone he can't ignore." She didn't know what he meant exactly, but there was something in his tone, something final, that unsettled her. It wasn't a threat, not quite, but it was close. Harold seemed like the type of man who'd spent a lifetime cleaning up after his son's recklessness, and maybe now he was ready to put a stop to it in his own way. Emily didn't press him further when they parted ways outside the diner. Liam had hugged his grandfather tightly, and even Sophie, who usually hesitated with strangers, held his hand as they crossed the parking lot. That night they all slept better than they had in weeks. For the next few days there was no sign of Daniel. No texts, no emails, no unannounced visits. It was unnerving, the quiet. Emily went about her routines, getting the kids to school, working shifts at the library, picking up groceries in Andersonville, attending Sophie's swim class, but every moment felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. She kept her phone fully charged, her security camera app open, and her keys laced between her fingers when walking to her car. Then came a call she didn't expect, Harold again. His voice was calm, but he didn't mince words. "Emily, Daniel came by last night. Drunk. Angry. Said some things I can't ignore." Emily's stomach twisted. "What did he say?" "He accused me of taking your side. Said I'd regret meddling." "I didn't rise to it, but Emily, I think you need to be ready. He's going to try something bigger. Not legal. Personal." There was a pause. "I'm sorry. I tried to talk to him. But he's past that." Emily thanked him and hung up, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to live in fear, but now the fear wasn't just for herself, it was for the kids. She went straight to Vanessa's office that afternoon and laid everything out. Vanessa listened intently, took notes, and then leaned back. "It might be time to file for a restraining order. It won't stop him if he's reckless, but it builds a case. And next time we call the police, no hesitation." Emily agreed. She wasn't about to let her children live under constant threat. That night, after the kids went to bed, Emily finally opened the envelope that had been collecting dust in the back of her desk drawer, Daniel's original letter to Liam. She hadn't read it before. She'd respected Liam's decision to keep it to himself. But now, with everything at stake, she needed to know what kind of words Daniel had written that had shaken Liam so deeply. The handwriting was messy, rushed. The contents, however, were worse than she imagined. The letter started with apologies, false ones, and quickly turned into emotional manipulation, blaming Emily, blaming the court, blaming even Liam for being easily turned against his own father. He accused the boy of betrayal, of weakness, and hinted that if Liam didn't grow up fast, he would regret the choices he was making. Emily's hands clenched the paper until her knuckles went white. This wasn't just toxic, it was calculated abuse masked as a father's sorrow. No wonder Liam had refused to speak of it. The next day, Emily drove to the school and arranged a meeting with the principal and the school counselor. She needed them to understand the situation fully. After reading the letter and hearing about Daniel's unscheduled visit, the principal promised stricter access control and even offered to assign a staff member to watch for any unauthorized presence during drop-off and pickup. It was a relief to be heard, but it also highlighted how vulnerable they truly were. One evening, just as she was about to tuck Sophie into bed, there was a knock at the door, too aggressive, too late at night. Emily's heart pounded. She motioned for Sophie to stay in her room and quietly walked to the door, peering through the peephole. It wasn't Daniel. It was a woman. Late 20s, hair pulled into a messy bun, pacing nervously. Emily opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The woman looked up, startled. "Are you Emily Dawson?" The name sounded foreign now. Emily paused, then nodded cautiously. "I'm Kara. I'm Daniel's ex. After you." Emily opened the door wider, confused but curious. Kara stepped inside and immediately looked like she regretted it. "I shouldn't have come, but I needed to talk to someone who gets it." Daniel's spiraling. "He reached out to me again last week, ranting about the court case about you. He said he was going to fix everything his way. I don't know what that means, but knowing him, it's not good." Emily gestured to the couch. They talked for over an hour. Kara detailed her own painful history with Daniel, how the charm turned to control, how the kindness became cruelty. "He doesn't know how to lose," she said. "He treats people like property. You the kids. He doesn't care what he destroys on the way down." By the end of their conversation, Emily felt more than just fear. She felt vindicated. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't exaggerating. Daniel's behavior wasn't about custody or love, it was about power. And now more than ever she knew she had to fight back, not just to protect her kids, but to finally end Daniel's hold on all of them. She thanked Kara and walked her to the door. Before leaving, Kara handed her a flash drive. "I recorded some of our calls. I kept them just in case. Maybe they can help you." Emily stared at the small device, the weight of it settling in her palm like a loaded weapon. Maybe, just maybe, this was the piece she needed. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Emily stayed up most of that night, the flash drive lying untouched on the kitchen table. Her thoughts tumbled between dread and hope, unsure which emotion deserved more weight. Every creak in the hallway made her jump, and each flicker of the porch light outside pulled her gaze. At around 3 a.m., with a cup of lukewarm coffee in her hand, she finally slid the flash drive into her laptop. The first audio file opened with a sharp inhale from Kara, followed by Daniel's voice, low, angry, unmistakably him. The conversations were scattered across several weeks, each clip more damning than the last. In one, he threatened Kara for not taking him back. In another, he cursed Emily by name, calling her a manipulative liar and vowing to take back everything she ever stole, including the kids. But it was the final file that stopped Emily cold. Daniel mentioned his plan, how he'd dig up dirt on Emily, find something to twist, and drop it in court like a bomb. His words were calculating, chilling. He laughed at the end of the recording, a laugh that made her skin crawl. Emily didn't sleep at all after that. As the first rays of sunlight hit the windows, she called Vanessa. "I have something," she said, her voice flat from exhaustion. Vanessa listened to one clip and immediately said, "Bring it in. This changes everything." Emily dropped off the flash drive before heading to work. At the library, her shift dragged. She checked her phone every few minutes, half expecting Vanessa to call, half dreading it. Finally, at 2:17 p.m., Vanessa's number lit up her screen. "We're filing a formal petition with the judge," she said. "Emergency hearing. This evidence is enough to request supervised visits only. Maybe even a complete suspension of contact for now." Emily felt a wave of cautious relief, but she knew better than to get ahead of herself. Daniel always found a way to fight back. 2 days later, Emily walked into the Cook County Family Court in downtown Chicago. Her palms were sweaty, but she held Liam's hand tightly. Vanessa was already waiting, her briefcase packed with transcripts of the audio files and a new affidavit from Kara, who'd agreed to testify if needed. On the other side of the courtroom, Daniel looked surprisingly calm. He wore a charcoal gray suit, his expression unreadable. But Emily knew better. She recognized the storm behind his eyes. The judge, a stern-looking woman with wire-rimmed glasses, glanced over the paperwork. Vanessa presented the flash drive as evidence, summarizing the threats and manipulations Daniel had directed toward both Emily and Kara. She laid it all out: the stalking, the drunken visits, the emotional damage to the children. When the judge listened to a portion of the final clip through earbuds and her eyes narrowed, Emily knew she had heard enough. Daniel's lawyer, a man with slicked-back hair and a voice that always sounded half-bored, tried to dismiss the audio as emotionally charged but legally irrelevant. He even hinted that Kara could be fabricating things out of bitterness. But the judge cut him off. "Mr. Brooks," she said firmly, "I don't need a lecture on what counts as coercive behavior. The threats are clear, the manipulation is clear, and the respondent's intentions are deeply concerning." She turned to Daniel. "Until further notice, all visitation rights are suspended. You may not contact your children or Ms. Dawson directly or indirectly, pending a full investigation. Violation of this order will result in contempt of court and criminal charges." Daniel stood up abruptly. "You can't do that. They're my kids." The judge didn't flinch. "You should have thought of that before threatening to harm their mother's credibility for personal gain." Emily watched him struggle to contain himself, his jaw clenched, his fists tight. For the first time he looked small, cornered. It wasn't over. It never would be with someone like him. But this was a win. A rare and powerful win. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa hugged her. "You were brave. You did everything right." Emily nodded, still in disbelief. Liam stood beside her, looking up at her with something she hadn't seen in a long time: peace. That night, back home in their small apartment, the three of them sat on the living room floor, eating pizza from their favorite spot on Clark Street. Sophie giggled at Liam's silly impressions, and for once, there was no edge to their laughter, no hidden worry behind their eyes. Emily let herself exhale. Still, she knew this wasn't the end of the road. Daniel wouldn't disappear. Men like him didn't. But now she had the court on her side, and more importantly, she had her children safe and believing in her. The strength she'd built quietly over months of pain was no longer silent. It stood tall in courtrooms and echoed in the smiles of her kids. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. Before going to next, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The final hearing came on a rainy Tuesday in late October. The streets of downtown Chicago were slick with water, and the courthouse steps were crowded with umbrellas and briefcases. Emily stood under the arch of the building, watching people pass as she waited for Vanessa to arrive. This time she wasn't shaking. She wasn't even anxious. Something had shifted inside her. Months of fear had crystallized into calm strength. The kids were at home with her mother, who had flown in from Kansas City the week before. Sophie had made Emily promise she'd come back with good news, the kind of innocent request that cut straight into her heart. Emily didn't know if today would be the end, but she was certain it would be the last time Daniel had the chance to scare them. Vanessa arrived as calm and focused as ever. "The judge will make a ruling today," she said. "No more continuances. We've done everything right and Daniel has no more leverage." Emily nodded, following her into the building. They sat in the same courtroom as before, under the same high ceilings, with the same stale scent of old wood and paperwork. Daniel was already there, seated beside his lawyer. He looked thinner than before, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. For the first time he didn't make eye contact. That told Emily everything. The judge entered swiftly and wasted no time. After reviewing all submitted documentation, including audio evidence, third-party affidavits, and a psychological evaluation, she began, her voice steady. "I have reached a decision in the matter of custody regarding minors Liam Dawson and Sophie Dawson." Emily held her breath. Her entire world hung in that pause. "The court finds that continued interaction with their father, Mr. Daniel Griggs, poses emotional and psychological risk to the children," the judge continued. "The petitioner, Ms. Emily Dawson, is granted full physical and legal custody. Mr. Griggs' parental rights are hereby terminated." The courtroom was silent for a beat, then Daniel stood up abruptly. "This isn't justice," he said, his voice rough and defiant. "You're letting her win because I've got money. That's what this is about." The judge fixed her eyes on him. "Mr. Griggs, your wealth had nothing to do with my decision. Your actions did." Bailiffs were already moving toward him, but he didn't resist. He just stared at Emily the same way he had in the beginning, like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. But now she didn't feel small under his gaze. She didn't flinch. She simply turned away. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa finally allowed herself to smile. "It's over," she said. "You're free." Emily didn't cry. She expected she would, but the moment came with a quiet grace instead. There were no fireworks, no music, just the gentle rhythm of rain against the courthouse windows and the sense that a chapter, long, dark, and exhausting, had finally closed. Back home, Emily sat her kids down at the kitchen table. "I have something to tell you," she said, brushing Sophie's hair behind her ear. "The judge said you don't have to see your dad anymore." Liam looked at her with wide eyes. "Ever?" Emily nodded. Sophie looked at Liam, then back at her mom. "Good," she said. "Now we can stop being scared at night." Emily didn't correct her. Instead, she pulled them both close and held on for a long time. The weeks that followed brought small, beautiful changes. Liam started playing piano again, practicing after school without needing to be reminded. Sophie slept through the night without crawling into Emily's bed. Emily herself found space to breathe again. She took longer walks, went back to reading novels on the couch, even joined a support group for women who had experienced emotional abuse. There, in a circle of strangers who understood every silent nod and trembling hand, she discovered something more than healing. She found purpose. One evening, a woman named Julia in the group shared how her ex-husband had convinced a judge she was unstable, resulting in her losing her children for 6 months. Emily stayed behind after the meeting to talk to her. They exchanged numbers. The next day she connected Julia with Vanessa. Slowly a pattern formed. More women came. More stories surfaced. Emily found herself speaking at community centers, libraries, and small gatherings. She didn't talk about revenge or bitterness. She talked about courage. About protecting your peace. About recognizing the red flags before they turn into chains. Daniel never tried to contact them again. Emily suspected he had moved out of Illinois, maybe even the country. The silence he left behind was the most generous thing he'd ever given. On Liam's 12th birthday, they celebrated at Millennium Park, eating cupcakes on a bench and watching people ice skate beneath the skyline. Liam gave Emily a letter he had written, folded neatly in an envelope with her name written in pencil. Inside it said, "Thank you for never giving up. I know things were hard, but you always made it feel like we were okay. I hope I can be strong like you when I grow up." She kept the letter in her bedside drawer, folded beside the custody papers. A quiet reminder of everything they'd been through, and everything they had left to become. One night, much later, Emily sat on the porch as Sophie read aloud from a book, her voice carrying over the hum of cicadas. The sky above Chicago was clear, stars faint but visible. There was peace now. Not the kind that comes from pretending things were never hard, but the kind that's earned, through fear, fight, and finally, freedom. If you've liked this story, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends.